second oral question, Baroness Wheeler, on behalf of Lord Collins of Highbury.
Thank you. On behalf of my noble friend and with his permission, I beg leave to ask the question standing in his name on the order paper.
My Lords, we welcome the cessation of hostilities between the government of Ethiopia and Tigrayan forces and subsequent uplift in aid deliveries, but the humanitarian situation remains dire for those impacted by the conflict. We are, of course, in regular touch with Ethiopian and Tigrayan leaders and the AU's High Representative Olusegun Obasanjo, and are working closely with the G7. The UK Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea raised with the Ethiopian PM Abiy this very issue in May.
Thank you. The Minister will know the huge scale of suffering in northern Ethiopia through hunger and malnutrition, with the UNOCHA reporting up to 3 million people desperately in need of food aid. Despite the welcome increase in supply, there are continued reports in some parts of Tigray that internally displaced people are still resorting to eating wild plants to survive. What steps are the government taking to end the continued humanitarian blockade and ensure that aid is received in all parts of Tigray?
My Lords, I agree with the noble lady. The challenge is immense in Ethiopia and across, particularly 9 million people in northern Ethiopia are in need of life-saving aid due to the conflict, and nearly 30 million people require life-saving humanitarian aid throughout Ethiopia in 2022. The UK has been working with our UN partners. We were involved at the very first set of convoys that went in to provide humanitarian relief and continue to do so. We've been looking and lobbying the Ethiopian government to restore access to cash, banking and communications. And since November 2020, the UK has provided more than £86 million to support vulnerable crisis-affected communities across Ethiopia, reaching communities in Tigray, Afar, Amhara, Oromia and Somali regions.
My Lords, around 26,000 women and girls need services following conflict-related sexual violence, and this violence has led to babies being born and their mothers ostracised. Can my noble friend the Minister provide an update following the deployment of the UK Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict team and say when their report will become available?
My Lords, as my noble friend will be aware, CRSV remains a key priority for the UK government, and the Foreign Secretary has made sexual violence and conflict one of her top priorities. In northern Ethiopia, the UK has provided £4 million to help support of survivors of sexual violence. My noble friend is correct. We have deployed experts and we're working with UNICEF, UNHCR in ensuring that full support can be provided to survivors. I'll be pleased to provide a detailed briefing to my noble friend on the detail of our support and also the focus we hope to bring at the PSVI conference in November.
My Lords, has the noble Lord had a chance to look at the link which I sent him over the weekend of a French documentary, the first in 18 months to be undertaken by international independent journalists who had access to Tigray, entitled Tigray, the Land of Hunger, and it develops a point made by the noble Baroness Lady Wheeler. It's about the deliberate starvation of the people of Tigray, which, my Lords, is a war crime. Does the noble Lord agree that with 6 million people under siege, starving to death, a situation that will only be worsened by the blockades in Ukraine, that Tigray is without electricity, internet, banking services and medical supplies, and the situation for them is dire? When will the FCDO Jack's report, the review of joint analysis and conflict stability in Ethiopia, be completed? And are we preserving the evidence so that those responsible for atrocity crimes will be brought to justice? Does he agree that there can be no peace without justice?
My Lords, on the noble Lord's final point, I totally agree with the noble Lord, and we are ensuring both through the deployment of experts and working with key international partners that we do exactly as the noble Lord suggests, is protecting the evidence so we can bring perpetrators of these crimes to justice. The situation in terms of the report, because now it has been enhanced through our ability to provide humanitarian support, is also being updated. And I regret to say to the noble Lord, I mean, we were just talking about home working. When you're a foreign minister, home working perhaps is also not part and parcel of the job, although this weekend I spent most of my time in Birmingham, so I haven't had time to read the report for the OSCE plenary, but I will look at the link the noble Lord has sent to me.
My Lords, with the World Food Programme estimating today that 40% of the population of Tigray are now with extreme lack of food, and with this now spreading with rising hunger in Amara and Afar regions neighbouring, and in Sudan, where I was 3 weeks ago, and in South Sudan, and with now an estimate that Somalia may have a famine for the first time in very, very many years. The Horn of Africa will see, on an unprecedented level, hunger. Can I reiterate my call for the UK government to convene a London summit on hunger, to coordinate the international effort? I applaud what the UK is doing, but it is not enough, and nor with the rest of the international community. Without that coordination, we will see potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people die this summer of something that is absolutely preventable.
My Lords, I agree with the Noble Lord about the need for coordination, and as I said earlier, that's why we're working particularly with key UN agencies who've been amongst the first to gain access to some of the regions that the Noble Lord himself has highlighted. And we are looking specifically at the other regions, as I said earlier, including Oromia and Somalia and Amara regions. However, the point is well made. We are coordinating our efforts. Whether it requires an international conference specific to this issue, I think there are a broader range of conferences currently taking place where this particular key issue of food security and the issue of famine relief should be central to the thinking and the outcomes.
One of the tragedies of our time that just a few years ago, Ethiopia was considered a model, one of the African success stories, since when the Nobel Prize-winning president has alienated minorities, brought in Eritreans on his side, and generally helped to cause the humanitarian crisis, which is the subject of this question. Was this matter raised at the recent CHOGM summit in Kigali because of the proximity of Uganda and Kenya? And what can we do in terms of coordination?
My Lords, first of all, I agree with the Noble Lord about the tragedy of what's happened in Ethiopia, and of course he's right. Prime Minister Abiy was very much at the forefront of bringing peace and security to the country and the surrounding region as well, and it's deeply, deeply tragic that we've seen the conflicts unravel in the way we are. However, there is a silver lining to this very dark grey cloud, not just in terms of humanitarian support, but the recent announcement on all sides to agree for discussions and talks to take place, and we're fully supportive of those particular efforts. On the issue of CHOGM, of course, we raised the issue of food security, in particular the issue of conflict prevention. And in bilateral discussions, the Foreign Secretary and my colleague, the Minister of Africa, raised these issues directly with the government of Ethiopia.
My Lords, would the Noble Lord the Minister agree that our selling arms to neighbouring Eritrea, a country with a dismal human rights record and an active participant in the maiming and killing in Tigray, is not exactly helping towards a peaceful resolution?
My Lords, again, without getting too much into the arms sales issue, as I've said repeatedly from the dispatch box, we have a very rigid policy when it comes to arms and defence sales across the world, and those same principles are applied irrespective of which country may be requesting that support or indeed assistance from the UK.
My Lord, this conflict is a humanitarian disaster of monumental proportions. 9 million people have been affected by it, and about 500,000 people have died. So turning to the peace process which is proposed, the TPLF does not trust the African Union to lead the peace process and instead wants Kenya to lead the process. So given that on Thursday of last week, Prime Minister Abiy's spokesperson spoke very positively about the relationship between Ethiopia and Kenya and the respective relationships between President Abiy and Prime Minister Abiy and President Kenyatta, should we not be arguing for the Kenyan government to work alongside the EAU and its envoy as a compromise solution? Because surely with what is at stake, that is what is necessary, a compromise.
My Lord, as the Noble Lord makes a very valid proposal, and I assure the Noble Lord in our engagement with Kenya, the importance of the situation in Ethiopia is very much part and parcel of our discussions. I think there will be a change of leadership very shortly in Kenya with President Kenyatta stepping down, but it's equally important that we engage proactively to ensure whoever then goes on to lead Kenya is fully engaged on the finding a solution to this process.
Has been raised. It really would the Ministry accept that consistency by the United Kingdom on the provision of giving licences for arms sales around the world would actually be extremely helpful, rather than the current inconsistent matter the issues are addressed. But would the Minister concur that peace in this troubled region would be enhanced if sustained and unhindered humanitarian access, the restoration of internet services, banking services, and the bringing it to an end of youth conscription would also, throughout the region, would be most welcome?
My Lords, on the Noble Lord's second suggestion, I've already in my earlier answers alluded to the fact that some of the very points the Noble Lord has raised are being discussed directly, and one hopes that the outcomes of these discussions, as and when they take place, will see a real focus on the priorities as the Noble Lord has articulated. On the issue of arms sales, I have to disagree. As I said, we have a process that is followed, which we seek to follow in every negotiation, every discussion we have. And of course, there's always learnings to improve that process, and we adapt those accordingly.